lines are there. And if they come under attack, you know, it'll be flagged on this website. I'll put a link in underneath. Obviously, one prays that they are successful, that they are able to land, that they can offload their aid, and that there's no violence involved. They're a non-violent peace force. Let's just hope in the next few days when they land in Gaza they'll be allowed to offload their aid. So that's a little summary of what I've been up to. There's a couple more things I'll say, but any comments on what I've said so far?
Well, I just read in connection with the information that UK and those are going to approve of Palestine and
Yes.
the two-state solution.
Yeah.
Netanyahu is on his way back home from the US, and his statement to that fact was, it is not going to happen. And we are going to expand our settlements on the West Bank as well. Continue building.
Sure. Well, I think he's an out of control leader.
He's
Demonic.
Yeah. Somebody should. Some rules should be made official and made valid in the world, that leaders, people that take leading positions in politics, country leaders, should have come with a clean bill of behavior. Should be.
Well, there should be some ethical codes.
Ethical codes, absolutely clean bill of ethics, and not like two which we know about that are clinging to the power to get away from prosecution and
Trump and Netanyahu are two examples.
For example.
Yeah. I mean,
it should be absolutely necessary. That should be a law.
I would even go further. I think that there should be a law that intelligence agents shouldn't ever become heads of state. I think that if you've served in the CIA or the KGB or MI6, fine, you know, I'm not saying there isn't a need for those kind of things, but I don't think they should ever become heads of state, because being an intelligence officer means you lie for a living. It's a dark and dirty and dangerous business, and I don't think you should ever get to be in a position of authority over the civilian political process in the country. That's the problem with Putin. He was an intelligence agent.
Yep.
It's the problem with what we've seen in, several American presidents were intelligence people, Bush Senior and so on. And we've seen it in Israel several times. So, yeah, that would help. But yes, so I want to just a couple more things before we go on and do our periodic table. I've said several times, I just want to say again, I'm reading this fantastic biography of George Orwell, and it's, he is a man of, I think, great integrity. He was on the left, but the centre left, not the sort of Stalinist left. He saw through what communism was doing. When he went to volunteer in Spain, and the communist agents working for Stalin tried to take over the Spanish Republican movement and to beat up any deviant groups. He actually ended up working with the Trotskyite group, which the Stalinists literally tried to shoot and kill them all, and the anarchists and so on. So this shocked Orwell. And he realised that Soviet communism wasn't the answer to Britain or Europe's problems. He did a review around that time, saying as much. He said that, yes, we need some kind of socialism in the West, but he said that what we shouldn't be doing is adopting a theory that was invented in Germany, remodelled in Russia, and then exported to the West, i.e. Marxism. which simply didn't sit with the needs of our culture. Anyway, the thing I want to mention about him is that his wife, Eileen, worked for the Ministry of Information during World War II, which was in Senate House in Bloomsbury, where my studies were conducted when I was at the University of London, studying Cold War history and all that. And that's where my viva was done, the examination, in Senate House, perhaps in the very office that his wife used to use. She was involved with something that was all hush secret. But her brother was a major surgeon, a medical surgeon, O'Shaughnessy. And he was an expert on research at the time into tuberculosis and other pulmonary diseases. And he had, he would have been able to save George Orwell's life had he lived, because he was pioneering new techniques and he would have got him into surgery and stuff. But he was in the Dieppe, the Dunkirk disembarkation. And this Dr. O'Shaughnessy was one of the last to leave the beach. He stayed behind to help the wounded, and he was on hand to give urgent medical aid and stuff. And he was shot. One of the last casualties on the beach in Dunkirk. And if you've seen the movie Dunkirk, you know what a horrendous thing all that was. It was brilliantly made, that film. And it's just a tragedy that the brother of George Orwell's wife, I never knew this before reading the book, was shot, killed in those last few moments on the beach. So when, after a couple of years after the war, Orwell gets really, really ill, nobody could save him, and he dies soon after, having written 1984 in Scotland. But his wife, Eileen, went into deep, deep grief over the death of her brother. They were very close. And obviously, with the death of my daughter, I can identify with poor Eileen, what she went through. And this is why, there's one death in the Dunkirk evacuation. There were thousands of deaths. That's thousands of people in deep grief. On all sides, the French lost lots of people, the Germans, the British. And if there was ever going to be a war, if we can't stop these crazy wars in Ukraine and Russia and Israel, Palestine, the piling up of that grief just reaches horrendous levels. And that's why, to me, peacemaking is a medical problem. I think that, and I think it's absolutely deplorable that Israel has targeted medical professionals helping in Gaza. They've arrested, tortured and killed hundreds of these medical doctors, nurses and so on. This is beyond all types of norms. So I'm afraid when Netanyahu says anything, my Muslim friend in the talk yesterday said he doesn't believe a word that comes out of his mouth. It is literally demonic. And I think we have to factor that in. On another note, I want to say I'm also reading, I always have several books on the go, the brilliant book Cosmos by Carl Sagan, who was a great scientist back in the 70s and 80s. He was an astronomer professionally in America, and he produced that amazing television series or film series called Cosmos, which I have. If you haven't watched it, get it and watch it. It's a masterpiece. And I bought the book of the script that goes with the show because it's so interesting, the data that's given in the series, and I wanted to read it. And I just want to quote from this one passage to set the tone of why we have a philosophy club and why peace matters. This is words of Carl Sagan. The conventional bombs of World War II were called blockbusters. Filled with 20 tons of TNT, they could destroy a city block. All the bombs dropped on all the cities in World War II amounted to some 2 million tons, 2 megatons of TNT. Coventry and Rotterdam, Dresden and Tokyo, all of that added up to about 100,000 blockbusters, 2 megatons, dropped between 1939 and 1945. By the late 20th century, 2 megatons was the energy released in the explosion of a single, more or less humdrum thermonuclear bomb. One bomb, therefore, had the destructive force of the entire bombs of Second World War. But there are tens of thousands of nuclear weapons. By the 9th decade of the 20th century, the strategic missile and bomber forces of the Soviet Union and the US were aiming warheads at over 15,000 designated targets. No place on the planet was safe. And the energy contained in these weapons, genies of death patiently awaiting the rubbing of the lamps, was far more than 10,000 megatons. So, entire World War II, 2 megatons. Now we've got 10,000 megatons waiting to go off. However, if you concentrate this destruction, not over 6 years, but over a few hours, it would be a blockbuster for every family virtually on the planet. A World War II every second for the length of a lazy afternoon. Now that's Sagan, and he was a peace activist like me, a scientist, because he knew how horrendous all this firepower is. And he says, in the wonderful chapter about intelligence in other parts of the universe, he talks about, the statistic probability there is going to be other intelligent beings in other planets, and how we can contact them. He says through radio astronomy, describes it in detail. But he says the problem will always be that a planet that has sufficient intelligence to become technically competent may self-destruct. That's the critical moment at which we have to harness our intelligence, not to blow ourselves up, but to consciously rein our aggression in and say, yeah, we can do that, but we're not going to. We're going to choose differently. And that's why I set up Philosophers for Peace. I mean, my colleague Tom Kibble set up Scientists for Peace. Sagan was part of the nuclear physicists working for peace and so on. But that need is still here with us. And that's why it's so important we have institutions like a European Union Mediation Service, like a US Institute of Peace, which can negotiate these things long term. The problem with the Trump approach is, well, I'm a big chap, I'll sort out war and peace with Ukraine and Russia, give me a week, because I'm great blustering, The problem, what these kind of people don't realise, is that it takes decades of profound thinking on how to proceed with diplomatic talks, with peace talks. There's protocols, there's all kinds of sophisticated ways of signalling time for peace. And the Trump approach won't do it. So you need institutions with intelligent people staffing it to do that work. And he's shut most of them down.
He's got his way of saying, I'll sort it. He's got two time aspects there. That's soon or in 2 weeks. Well, soon means sometime, maybe the next 3-4 years, and 2 weeks is indefinite.
It's just showmanship. I mean, the guy is a reality.
He's an idiot.
TV star. I mean, it's showmanship, and it's not how to make peace long term, and it's a destructivist approach, as was Brexit. It's like smash the institutions, smash the European Union, break up the UK, etc., etc. No, keep our institutions, but make them peace-oriented. In the chapter on radio telescopes, the thing is you have to point the radio telescope at a likely source and beam signals to it and listen, because those other intelligent civilizations will be far ahead of ours, statistically. They will have sent signals here which take about 200 years to reach us, travelling at the speed of light, if they haven't cracked the speed of light, which I think they might have done. But if they're still going at light speed, it takes 200 years from the nearest star to reach us, and radio signals travel at the speed of light. So if they were sent, a few hundred years ago, then they would be reaching us now. So, but you have to point the telescope at the right likely source. I think there's a comparable metaphor here. If we want peace, we want to pick up those signals, we have to turn our institutional mechanisms and all that expertise towards the place called peace. At the moment, it's all pointed towards war, victory, violence, weapons. Trillions are going in. Let's have a few pointed towards peace. That's what I've been consistently saying. Well, I wanted a peace institute at the University of London and still do, and, etc. So, and just to finish this before we move on, I watched a very interesting film this week about an American photographer who was taking photographs at the end of World War II, and she was the first person to get in the concentration camps, Buchenwald and elsewhere, and she got her footage back, and people didn't really want to publish it. It was so shocking, and an amazing woman. There's been a full-length film made of her, which I will put in the chat the exact link to the film. It's worth watching. So I think, again, more evidence, if we need more evidence, for the stupidity of war and violence. Right, let's move on and let's do a periodic table choice. Ha.
Philosophy, pro-Socrates.
Okay, the pre-Socratics.
Yeah.
Number 59, right, that's brilliant. Let's have, to balance that, we'll have 154, which is materialism. Another branch of philosophy. Okay. Well, that's interesting and quite relevant to Carl Sagan, because Carl Sagan loves the pre-Socratics. It's a term used for the philosophical traditions of ancient Greece and Ionia that predated Socrates. And these were thinkers like Thales, who was half Phoenician, half Greek, lived in Miletus, which is a city I've been to. It's now in ruins, but there's a great museum on the western coast of Turkey. And they were looking for what's called the arche, which is the Greek for the source, the origin. What does everything come from? The Greek philosophers said it comes from the arche, which is the same root word as in architect, meaning the top one, the source architect, the guy in charge of the building program. And Thales said the arche, where life comes from, is water. That's the primal element where everything comes from. And, he's not necessarily that wrong, because I think it's pretty much clear that wherever water is, you will find life. That's what they look for on other planets in radio astronomy and elsewhere. They're trying to see which planets may have water on, and then home in, because that's probably where life is. So far as we know, life isn't possible without water. So Thales was right in that, and he was, saying this in the 6th century BC. Another great pre-Socratic thinker was Heraclitus, slightly later, but round about that time. He was from Ephesus, which is another town along the coast, which I've also been to. He said, yes, Thales, I love your theory about water, very clever, but where does water come from? There has to be a spark of energy from which, everything comes from. And that is most likely fire, said Heraclitus. In the void comes fire, light, stars, warmth. And water comes from that when it cools and condenses, like steam. So Heraclitus said the arche is fire. And other thinkers had different theories.
Must be oxygen as well. Otherwise, you can't have fire.
Yes. Well, that was a theory of some of the others. Anaxagoras, for instance, said, no, it's air that is the primal origin of life. It's the arche. So they were all having these discussions and debates, but they were beginning to philosophize. You can sit around a table like we're doing here in Miletus or Ephesus in the 6th century BC, and you could discuss this rationally, and look at the evidence. Empedocles came along a bit later and said, maybe the arche is all of them. Maybe they go through a cycle. So what is at first looks like fire becomes air, becomes water, and becomes earth. And it goes round in a cycle of the elements. That was an interesting theory he put forward. Another great intellectual pre-Socratic figure was Pythagoras. And he had travelled widely. He'd been to Egypt, he'd been to Babylon, Phoenicia. He was also half Phoenician from Lebanon. And he said that basically the arche is relationship between different aspects of reality. The language for that is mathematics and music. So ultimately the arche is number, arithmos. And that number is a code for describing relationships. Where you have manyness, which is what we have in life. We have earth, air, fire, water. We have up, down, left, right. When you get all that, you then need mathematics to make sense of it all. So Pythagoras said, therefore number is the arche, because that is what can analyse the relationship between all the manyness of things. And he set up a mystery school in Crotona, southern Italy, to teach this mystery with a symbolic diagram, a triangle with 10 points. The bottom row is 4, then the next one up 3, then 2, and then 1. This tetractys, it's called, was like a symbol of the ultimate arche. And his students would have to swear an oath of probity before this tetractys. It was like a mystery school. It's the first academic centre in Western Europe, or in Europe, in fact. And he condensed down the teachings of Egypt, Babylon, Phoenicia, Greece, all into a sort of, an amalgam that we would call, and he coined the word philosophy by tradition. People asked him, what are you doing, Pythagoras, in this school? He said, well, we're studying philosophy. So that's his coinage. Another thinker who was around about the same time, a pre-Socratic, was called Parmenides. Parmenides was a poet and a logical thinker. He wrote a great poem on logic, The Search for Truth. And he disagreed with Pythagoras and his obsession with the manyness. Parmenides said, look, the arche is the one. Everything comes from unity. And it never leaves it. So you think there's manyness, but it's actually all one. Up, down, left, right. It's all oneness. And you think you're separate selves and souls and different people in incarnation, but actually you're one mind, you're one eternal spirit. And his theory was about the unity behind diversity. And he was very popular too. He went to Athens and met Socrates. One of Plato's greatest dialogues is called the Parmenides, in which Parmenides explains his theory of unity, which is very much like Indian philosophy. One of the questions that historians of philosophy like to ask is, to what extent was the relationship between these different schools going on historically? To what extent did these pre-Socratics pick up on ideas from India? Because there's similar ideas. Or from the Persian Empire, which was then all the way from there, you could walk through the Persian Empire to northern India. They had a postal service that worked. You could send a letter to a Brahmin in India and get a reply back to Ephesus. It's all part of the same thing. So that's an interesting area of research for the table. So that's the pre-Socratics, and it's, Sir Karl Popper, who I heard give his last talk, he was a fan of the pre-Socratics. you know, and he studied all of them in great detail. He was a 20th century British philosopher. Any questions about, have you come across them before?
Yeah, a lot of them, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, as a naval guy, you'd like Thales and the water people. Water's the source of everything.
There's a French company called Thales, who do a lot of ocean surveys, and they also arms manufacturer, of course. And
I have heard of them, yes, and I was aware they'd invoked his name.
yeah.
I didn't know they were still going. They're French, are they?
I think the main company is French. The mother company is French, I think.
Okay.
Thales, they bought a few scientific research companies in UK, in France, and
Yeah.
so it's now a fairly big organisation.
Oh, right. Well, if they want to set up a centre for peace studies and peace research, the Thales Centre for Peace Studies, we can do philosophy. That would be great. We can invent machines that create peace, you know, like the Institute of Heart Math do. Heart coherence.
It's
You
also
could beam it out over a city like Los Angeles.
It's also a bit interesting that the Pythagoras triangle. You know the Pythagoras
Theorem, yeah.
theorem. A triangle is also a very much used symbol or aid in both in electronics and as well as in physics. You have in mathematics as well.
Yeah, you triangulate 3 points.
Absolutely.
To navigate at sea and stuff.
Yeah. And also electronics, for example, you can calculate resistance required in an electronic circuit.
Right.
The voltage equals resistance times current.
Okay.
Resistance and ohm.
You need 3 numbers to then work.
You need 3 numbers,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
you can manipulate those, and you find out all the details by just using that triangle.
Yes.
The triangle of fire, for example, the physics as well. It's a very helpful little device.
No, I mean, geometry is the key. Plato put over the academy, let no one enter here who
Absolutely.
doesn't know geometry. And the Greeks loved all this, and still do, and the Egyptians loved their maths. And I think Pythagoras got turned on to maths when he was in Egypt.
Probably, yeah.
And they loved triangles because they were doing kind of trigonometry for land surveying and working out areas, and after all they built the pyramids to a really fine
It's amazing.
level of detail using their mathematical skills. And the Egyptians had a goddess of mathematics called Seshat, who had temples. So the priests would go and pray to get their sums right when they were building the pyramids. Because to Pythagoras, knowledge is sacred, and mathematics is sacred. That's why I wrote a whole book on religious mathematics, because for me it's sacred. It's a wonder. There's a whole chapter on triangles, squares, you know, the different shapes of geometry, and the different numbers. There's a chapter on the number 1, 2, 3,
Yeah,
etc.
I used mathematics a lot when designing various devices to be used in the ocean, sort of subsea equipment.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. But also the science of big numbers interests me. Like, if I say how many atoms are there at any one time in all the oceans of the world combined, we couldn't even begin to estimate. You know, it's in the zillions and zillions. There aren't the numbers for it.
Little Edward could have answered that.
But, you know, that's why I talk about divine intelligence. Human intelligence is quite good. We're quite good, especially now we've got AI and things and computers. But we ain't nothing compared to divine intelligence, which somehow is behind all this. It's a god and a goddess having fun, it seems to me. Seshat and her consort have created this whole thing for fun. And also as a form of music. So the other thing I was doing this week is working with a student who's doing a PhD on musicology and consciousness and energy. And, you know, the gods create the world out of song. And Pythagoras was able to show that music and maths are interconnected. You know, maths is the music of creation by the divine intelligence. We shouldn't blow it, you know, because it would be, I mean, like destroying this planet would be very bad form if, from the perspective of the gods and the philosophers.
It's going to be a bad day.
It would be a terrible thing, you know. Let's not take it down that route. Let the crazy demonic leaders like Netanyahu and Putin be reined in by the good guardians of this planet, educated as to morality, sent to the bottom of the class, do a detention, whatever it is they do with them. All those are strategies I would recommend. And then they should just do some studying, you know, and reawaken their own innate ethics and goodness, which is in there, just gone missing. Yeah.
Somebody I know used to say, you can't educate pork.
It's a saying, yeah. I mean, I think human beings can and are. I mean, I've taught in some really difficult schools with very, very naughty kids, really naughty. But eventually you get through to them because you appeal to their innate sense of human goodness, and it's there in everyone. It just sometimes takes a while to come out. And anyway, to say that those pre-Socratics are lovely, I love them, but then Socrates came along and he said, look, all that pre-Socratic stuff, it's very clever, you know, number, music, fire, water and all that. But the key question for philosophy to ask is about ethics, goodness, virtue, you know, justice. He said we've got to ask about human reality, not what's the arche. We'll leave that to the gods. Let's talk about how we can treat each other ethically and correctly. What kind of city-state do we want? Do we want a city-state which spends millions on blowing up other city-states? Or do we want a city-state that lives in peace within its borders, in peace with its neighbours? And if so, how are we going to get that? That was the great Socratic insight, but he's the next box, 77. We'll do him another time. Let me do the one I chose, which was 154, materialism. And this is an interesting one because, you know, it's very fashionable now to be anti-materialist, to say, well, I don't agree with materialism, it's all, you know, terrible, and now I want spiritualism. I think it's both and I have studied history of philosophy for many years. I mean, the idea that matter is important and worth studying, I think, is a medical discovery. Again, going back to Egypt, it was the Egyptians that really studied the body. They did anatomy, they learned how to treat ailments, they had amazing medical knowledge gathered from the physical body and the study thereof. And the Greek physicians like Hippocrates, also they think matter is very important because human bodies can get really ill and sick and get, you know, terrible diseases and die. And so let's study medicine physically. And the word for a doctor is a physician. The word physis, physics, physical, physician, comes from the Greek word for nature, physis. And so studying our physical forms is an important part of philosophy. It's why it's here. And what exactly matter is very interesting. It was Democritus, another Greek philosopher who spent time in Egypt, as they all did, who came up with atomic theory. He said matter seems to be made of tiny little bits called atoms, it's a word he coined, that can't be subdivided anymore. He speculated they're like tiny, tiny, tiny things. And you know, he wasn't that wrong, because that's the root of atomic theory. An Indian from the same era, Charvaka, way across the continent of Eurasia, had come up with the same idea. And Epicurus as well, another great Greek philosopher, had the same idea. It's atoms.